Welcome back. This is card 10, the Wheel of Fortune, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And before we get into discussing the chapter in earnest, I wanted to let you know that I had a really hard time with this chapter. Part of it, for sure, is a hang-up that I have about the chapter and more generally about the whole text, but we'll get into that in a second. But the chapter itself felt just difficult to get through. There's a lot of confusing stuff in the chapter for me, and I wonder if that's intentional or just a product of this being the Wheel of Fortune and representing that sort of like possibility and the chance and the chaos of it. So what I managed to pull out as Sallie Nichols' main point, essentially, is that this is a representation of causality and the implication that both conscious choice and unconscious action influence how we interact with the world. Let's start with conscious choice, unconscious action. Sallie Nichols doesn't really talk about conscious choice at all, and that makes 100% sense to me because A, that's how we usually think about how we interact with the world, and B, Sallie Nichols has spent the last 12 chapters of this book talking to us about how our conscious choice affects how we interact with the world. So I don't think she needs to tell it to us one more time. But the unconscious action part of that, I think, is really interesting because she ties it back to the Jungian concept of the 5 instincts, which, from my understanding, are sort of under this umbrella of libido. And it is sort of what you're thinking, but it's also that Carl Jung took the term libido and said, no, that just means mental energy, psychic energy, time, effort, willpower, emotional energy that drives us to do these 5 things, which are creativity, reflection, activity, sexuality, and hunger. So this makes sense to me because as a creative person, usually it's not that I choose that I want to be creative. It's that I choose how I want to be creative, and the impulse to create is an unconscious thing, that an unconscious feeling that I just get sometimes. And it's not something that I chose to start feeling creative. It's that unconsciously I want to create things. I have this drive to make things, and I essentially gave myself the illusion of choice by taking this feeling, this energy, and applying it to things that were interesting to me. So like learning to play guitar, learning to sing, learning how to work with wood, making videos, doing acting, all of these things. And that these are common things that we all have. These are all drives that we have and we have to sort of wrestle with. So I think that's a very interesting take. The other part of it that she talks about is causality, which she links to at least this idea of fatalism, which in ancient cultures we saw as the fates, like those from Greek and Roman mythology, or the Norns from Norse mythology, who are a set of goddesses who are in charge of weaving the tapestry of humanity, taking each individual thread, each individual life, and weaving it in with all of the others to show how our life would go. And that the idea was they knew exactly what was going to happen and how it would all unfold. Which I'm not sure that I 100% agree with, even though I know that a lot of times we do, as humans, generate this illusion of choice when we have already made a decision. But that's a whole other argument to make. What I really want to talk about, I wrote a long annotation for this, so buckle up when we get to it, but is the Sphinx in this card. At the very top of this card, there is a Sphinx. And Sallie Nichols spends way too much time doing the whole blue curtains thing with this Sphinx. If you're not quite aware of what the blue curtains analogy is, it's this idea that like an English professor or an English teacher would be talking to their students, and in the book that they're reading, there's a description of these blue curtains in the main character's room. And the professor or the teacher is going on and on and on about the symbolism of these blue curtains and how they are so meaningful to the story, when in all actuality, they could just be blue curtains because the author wanted there to be that particular color in there and was not thinking about any of the underlying symbolism at all. What Sallie Nichols does, though, is she takes this Sphinx as a representation of the Sphinx from the myth about Oedipus and the Sphinx. Well, technically the myth of Oedipus, but there's a specific sort of scene there where Oedipus meets a Sphinx. And in Greek mythology, most Sphinx are female. They're gynosphinxes. And what Sallie Nichols does is she like deep dives into this idea of the Sphinx as an awful, terrible, smothering, feminine character, and just like gives it in the most nasty and like upsetting understanding of femininity that I can imagine. So I wrote out this note. A nagging and troubling thought that keeps recurring as I read through this book is that I think Sallie Nichols has considerable contempt for, if not all, then certainly her own femininity. Perhaps this is a byproduct of the time or the psychological lens and or history she is interpreting this through, but it creates dissonance for me whenever she brings up the necessary inclusion of both male and female in individuation and transcending the sleepy state to understand the self better. Neither side, masculine nor feminine, are bad, nor are they good. They should represent different facets of human personality, consciousness, and the collective unconscious, and both the help and harm contained within. It just seems to me that the repetition of Nichols casting the feminine or female figures in the shadow of the masculine or male, as subordinate to the masculine or male, or as simply negative in opposition to the positive masculine or male, is harmful and should be considered as a flaw in the interpretations here within the book. And obviously, it's upsetting to me. And I think part of what's upsetting about it is because we just came from 9, the Hermit. And the Hermit is this idea of synthesizing all of the information and all of the aspects of ourselves and using that to not only help us understand who we are, but help other people understand who they are as well. And then she immediately turns around and says, well, yes, all of it is important, but masculine is always positive and feminine is always negative. And she's, throughout the whole book, whenever a female figure pops up, she like automatically puts forth this idea that the character is in some way sort of a negative influence. She will occasionally put like, but also it could be interpreted as insert positive influence. But there's always a negative interpretation of a female character. And also, the tarot hero is never referred to as female. None of the female figures in any of the cards are ever referred to as the hero. They're always secondary characters, which is not true, I think, in tarot, but also very definitely not true in real life. So thank you for letting me vent. I could go on for like another 15 minutes. One of my takes was just 15 minutes of me ranting about this. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, love you, bye!